Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Welcome back to Driving the Line, the podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. I'm Jim Seibert, and I am joined with Mike Bohan and Kenny Ray, our good friends and work colleagues. And the topic for today is the National Work Zone Safety Awareness Week. Gents, good day. How are y'all?
Everything's good in Texas, Jim. Good to see both of y'all.
Good to be back. My daughter, the most beautiful little thing I have ever seen, has turned 14 years old. And in the state of Oklahoma, they've just passed a law that's been around for a while in many other states, where at the age of 14, if you live on a registered farm, a certain distance away from school, you can obtain a farm/school permit. And so my 14-year-old that's turning into a lady right before my eyes, and I'm not going to dwell on that too much because I'll get all teary-eyed, and we're not about that. We're going to stay solid here. She has successfully passed. To get this permit in the state of Oklahoma, you have to pass the physical driving demonstration, and the tester was a 30-year retired police officer for the town, and he administered those tests, the physical driving portion, and she had to pass the written examination for a full-blown driver's license. So she'd been preparing, she'd been studying. We live on a real nasty dirt road. We got an old Jeep Wrangler, and we had been practicing out in the pasture and on them backcountry roads in the church parking lots. Not on Sunday mornings because we didn't need any fender benders, but she did really well. But a prerequisite to submitting her paperwork for this permit was that in Oklahoma, she had to register and take and receive a certificate from the Work Zone Safety website. And there's a national test that you can take, this curriculum, and then Oklahoma also has their own specific portion of that Work Zone Safety driving within that national. And that's put on by the American Traffic Safety Services Foundation. And I took it with her. And then I also took the national, and man, did I learn a lot about stuff that just as a young driver, if I can go back there in my mind, there was so much of this that wasn't spelled out that I've just learned by driving all these years, what some of the signs meant, some of the warnings that would prepare me for what I'm about to come up on. And this course really did an excellent job of explaining that and providing real life situations and sharing statistics. And I know that previous podcasts we've discussed distracted driving awareness, and this Work Zone Safety program, I mean, it highlighted that. 2021, 956 motorists died in Oklahoma, specifically in work zones. 2021, 108 workers in those work zones died, specifically in Oklahoma. That's crazy. It's specifically in Oklahoma, and 956 motorists died only in work zones. And 108 workers in those work zones were killed. So those stats, and watching my 14-year-old, her eyes open up that driving is a serious deal. It was well worth the time. I'm glad that Oklahoma has that requirement, because trying to impress upon, I'm in the safety industry. This is what we do, right? Every day. And my kids ask, or they tell their friends, Dad, what do you do for a living? I'm like, I'm a safety guy. My friends are like, oh, the safety guys here, we'll be building barns or working on the farm. And they make a joke out of it. But watching my daughter go through this course and watch video from the Oklahoma Highway Patrol and see these real life stories of the 13 and a 15-year-old daughter at the time of one of these workers that their dad went to work and he never came home. So I think it's an excellent program, and I'm glad that Oklahoma has the rule, and that's the topic, work zone safety for today. So, gentlemen, if I was to blindfold you and we went on a road trip, if we never left pavement, but we met the roughest roads that you'd ever felt before, what state do you think that you would be in?
Louisiana.
Louisiana gets a vote.
Yeah, actually, I was just down there earlier this year, Kenny, and I might throw my hat in on that one too, because I spent some time driving around down there, and I think there's a few that would rival it though. I tell you what, I-70 out west, Colorado, man, that thing will beat you to death.
Well, if you blindfolded me and just took me for a long drive, the moment that my brain starts shaking in my skull, I'm going to tell you we're back in Oklahoma. I wonder what kind of racket. I might be getting a little bit too political, maybe a little bit too in the sauce. Kenny, have you ever in your life, from Dallas to Oklahoma City, traveled that corridor and not seen it under construction?
Never,
right?
Yeah.
It seems like Dallas, Fort Worth, the old memories that I've got of going down there and trying to, it's like everything changes all the time. There's constantly construction and a work zone somewhere. And I have never been on I-35. So I've come down from York, Nebraska. I think it's 181. It turns into 135 north of Salina. And then it's 135 till you hit Wichita. And at Wichita, it branches to 35 up towards like Kansas City. I've never, ever seen that stretch of road not have construction on it.
You know what makes these construction zones so complex, and I'm glad you referenced our last podcast on distracted driving, is you're driving along at regular highway speeds on the normal part of the highway, if we can call it normal, and then all of a sudden you come up on something that's going on, and you're never real sure what they're doing, whether it's a temporary they're out there patching a pothole, or if they're replacing a guardrail, or if they're full-blown pulling up old pavement and laying new pavement, or pouring concrete, or putting steel down, or whatever. But all of a sudden you go from, and let's just talk about an interstate highway. You go from 4 or 6 lanes, 2 or 3 either direction, with an improved shoulder, down to now where they put those concrete, or the truck drivers call them Jersey barriers, those concrete barriers down, and they shrink the lanes in to where they're just legal, 10 foot maybe. Most of them won't even let permit loads go through them. And plus they oftentimes deviate the course. You've got the road was normally straight, but now they're building a new bridge, so they detour you around the old bridge. And you've got all these factors going, and you've been running 70 or 75 miles an hour legally, and all of a sudden now they want you to come down to 30, 35, 20, 25 even. And so you're trying to control the environment of that vehicle in all of these changes, and then you put men and women working inside that area.
Inches away.
Yeah, and I want to share one other thought, and then I'll yield to you two guys. I teach work zone safety a lot when I speak at trucking companies, and I always and a lot of my clients are in Houston, and I'll tell you an example I use when I'm in Houston. Houston is the petrochemical capital of our nation, bar none, maybe of the world. There's more refineries along the Houston Ship Channel than you'll find almost anywhere else on our planet. And I tell those truck drivers, imagine if you were driving your vehicle and you go down, and I won't name it on our podcast, but for them, I'll name one of the big chemical companies or refineries that they're all very familiar with. And I'll say, what imagine if they just opened the gate of that place and let the traffic off the interstate just drive through where all those refinery workers are working. I said that's the point I'm making is that construction zone, that work zone, that's the workplace for those workers. We're literally driving through their work location. And we're doing it while we're distracted. We're doing it while we're speeding. We're doing it while, plug in whatever else. And the point is that whenever you go through a construction zone, we tend to simplify that in our mind and say, oh, I got to slow down. I'm going through a work zone. That is an extremely complex environment when you add all the different variables into it that go into it. It becomes complex very, very quickly. You add in nighttime with reduced visibility. And I don't know how it is in the major cities in y'all states, but we've got now in Texas, if you go to any of our major urban areas, I'm talking about Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, El Paso, the construction zones are 24/7. You can drive through there at 3 a.m. and they've got the big lights up and they're out there pouring concrete at 3 o'clock in the morning. And sometimes those lights are all jimpy wad, and you come through that detour, and all of a sudden that light, it looks like you're facing a railroad, a train, And my point is, these things are not simple. It's not just driving by a bunch of orange cones and a guy or gal out there holding a flag. These are complex driving situations, and they deserve our fullest attention.
Yeah, and Kenny, it's just like the roads that we drive on every day that we're familiar with. I'll make this point. If you're running across the country, if you're in an area that you're not familiar with, or it's a new work zone, if you've been through it once, you may know, okay, yeah, this is how they shift lanes here, and then we shift back over here, and you kind of know the drill. But a lot of times when we're going through a work zone, it's the first time we've seen it. It's new to us, and we don't want to be coming into that thing hot, because now we're trying to react to something. We don't really know what's going to happen around the next turn, because it's a new work zone to us. So you guys have mentioned this, and if there's two things that you guys remember from me out of this podcast, I will say this is, when you guys are entering a work zone, one, do not speed. Reduce your speed. Get down to a point where you can react properly to the hazards of that work zone. That's a big deal. The second thing is, do not in any way, shape, or form be distracted when you're going through a work zone. Those two things right there are, to me, the biggest issues that we face is, there's going to be, as Kenny said, it's a complex situation. There's going to be things we have to react to. And if we are speeding, which we've already said, the faster you go, the harder it is to react to hazards. And if you're distracted, you're taking your eyes off of what's going on ahead of you. It's a recipe for disaster. And if we're driving through these folks' place of work, like Kenny said, and these guys and gals that are in these work zones are inches away from moving traffic. So we need to have enough respect for them in their workspace to protect them in what we're doing, and make good decisions on our part, because I'm telling you that some of those, and especially, we're talking to truck drivers and trucking companies, some of those work zones get tight. They always narrow the lanes down. They push lanes together, things like that. If you're driving a truck through there and they tell you, hey, trucks, get in the left lane, do your best to get in that left lane in a safe manner. If you're driving a four-wheeler out there and you're listening to us, maybe you're not a truck driver, maybe you just work for a trucking company, or you're just a listener that's jumping on and hearing what we have to say. Be aware that trucks need some space in those work zones. Don't get right up beside them. Don't get in their blind spots. Don't cause them a problem because you're unaware that trucks need that space. They need the space. Give them the space when they're going through the work zone, because it can be quickly become a matter of life and death, just like that, at snap of a finger. So, but just guys, remember, for me, at least for me on my part, avoid the distractions. Reduce that speed. You're always going to see the speed reduction, but get down below that speed limit where you can effectively operate that vehicle and react to the hazards above. Because you guys had talked about stats in your states. Missouri had similar stats off their page. I think it was 2022. They said distracted driving contributed to 411 work zone crashes in 1 year. That's not fatalities, that's just crashes. So 411 crashes because of distracted driving in work zones. And then speeding involved 13% of work zone crashes. So speed and distraction are a big deal when it comes to our work zones. So take that and mull it over in your mind when you're coming into those work zones. Because guys, to me, and I'm going to yield to you guys, but I want to give a shout out to our folks out there with the Department of Transportation who are out there working on these roads. Thank you. We want the roads fixed because what's the alternative? I mean, we think about work zones as a negative thing. It slows us down. It's always a pain. But if they're not fixing those roads, what's the alternative? I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely.
We got to have roads to drive on. We got to have roads for our folks listening to us to get the goods up and down the road. So we need them to happen. We need them to be out there working. We just need to be extremely careful when we're moving through their workspace.
Jim, before you change gears, Jim, Mike, I think it bears repeating multiple times through this particular episode. Reduce speed and do not be distracted. Mike hit the nail on the head. But every once in a while, I'll have a truck driver say, and they're not being disrespectful, and they're not really challenging. They want to know the rationale behind the advice we give, and they may say, "Why? Why do I need to slow down, and why do I need to not be distracted?" And I want to share at least two reasons. I think there's more, but number one, that's a completely unforgiving environment. You do not have an out. There's no out. When they bring those Jersey barriers in and shrink that lane down to 10 foot, and you've got 3 foot tall concrete barrier on either side, you have nowhere to go whatsoever if something happens. You can't go right. You can't go left. You can't do anything but try to jam on the brakes. It's a completely unforgiving environment. And the second reason, and truck drivers, if there's any language truck drivers understand, it's the language of money. At least in Texas, and I think it's this way across the nation, if you get a moving traffic violation in a work zone, that fine automatically doubles. And in some states, they post the minimum. I've seen before, it's like $5,000. I mean, it take a truck driver a long time to make $5,000, and he get a speeding ticket in a work zone, he just threw it away. You know, it's an unforgiving environment. It's expensive, the consequences if it happens. And again, the reason for that is to make sure we follow the things Mike said: slow down and don't be distracted.
That's some pretty excellent input, and a lot of what you said kind of resonates with me. Going through a construction zone at night and the 24/7 operations, yeah, this training really highlighted some of that as well. And I'll tell you, since I got LASIK surgery a few years ago, and since I've had that, I no longer can have lights that come into focus. I get a lot of light wash. And so a regular light now looks like a huge cluster. And so when I go through, if those lights are jippy wad, and this happens, Kenny, if I'm going through one of these construction zones at night, a hyper sense of awareness, because these lane shifts, the tightness of them, like that, the danger zone for me, and I'm sure for many other people that have, eye correction, the danger zone for me is I need to be able to identify what's going on in that work zone. And this, the three major things for work zone safety behaviors: distracted driving, lack of seat belts, if you can believe that, and speeding. Those are the three biggest work zone risk behaviors that the ATSS Foundation has called out. And so you guys brought up so many things that I'm not going to be able to get them all. So I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about some of the laws. And these laws change by where you're at. There's merging laws. We all see these signs as we're approaching. Like there's a queuing where you come up on, there's a long row of traffic and you just stop there. You don't have to feel like you're the only one frustrated by the queuing of a work zone entry. Everybody, when they get interrupted from what they want to be doing, get frustrated. There's the official entering of the work zone and the exiting of the work zone. And Kenny, your analogy of a workplace, it's spot on. How would we feel if a vehicle, like we're sitting in our chair right now at a desk, and a vehicle comes right behind us in our hotel room or our home office, wherever we're at right now, going 65 in a 35 zone, and you know that there's a serpentine coming up, multiple lane shifts. How squeezed, and then let's talk about the technical expertise of these big rig drivers, that they are driving something way bigger than that little electric car that's behind them, and they're navigating the same space. That makes me extremely uncomfortable to think that I'm that close to something moving that fast and that large. So as we're doing the queuing and the entering, we're looking for the signs, and the signs are set up in a specific order that talk about what kind of merge is going to happen, right? How are you merging from a 2-lane into a 1-lane? And as we look at that, how many of you guys have seen the signs that I've just seen them over the last couple of years? Zipper. It'll just say zipper ahead, or it'll say, we're closing the left lane, merge right, right? And so we see that sign and we get in the right-hand lane, and then we get every knucklehead, and maybe I should not be so passionate right now. Maybe I should take it easy. But we get all the people that did not recognize and listen to the merge now law pass us just to pass 20 vehicles and cause the whole process to slow down even further by passing us instead of adhering to merge now or the do not pass law. I mean, am I the only one that gets really frustrated? I'm seeing some smiles. I think not. But then we get the other people that say, well, I'm just going to straddle both lanes, right? So those laws, the merge now, that is a citable law. Obey signs and the flagger. Now we're adding a person on foot that's holding a sign in the middle of the road with people that are distracted coming into the work zone. Some of the, they meet the criteria, the speeding or the distracted driving of the poor safety behaviors in a work zone. Cannot go around, through, or damage barricades. Endangerment, you can be cited whether you had an infraction or not, but if your action within a work zone endangers a worker, that's a citable offense now. So there's many things. When you are in a work zone, you are in the office, the workplace of another human being, and there's trucks and there's equipment that is entering and exiting. And some of the statistics shared are when a vehicle left their path and they followed a truck into the designated safety zone. And thinking into my ag background and thinking back into the military and some of the operations we had, we would establish designated safe zones for foot traffic. Right. And that area was controlled and it's flagged, and we'd have chemical lights. We'd have all sorts of things that said no vehicles over here. Well, only vehicles that were controlled entry and exit. Many, many instances of a vehicle not paying attention, blindly following a vehicle that's got placards on the back say do not follow into a work zone, and creating significant wrecks, fatalities, because they're trying to still operate at a high rate of speed. So a lot goes into these work zones. They are a complex system that we, in our minds, as just a professional driver and the go speed racers that we are as human beings, thinking I am ultimately in control of everything that I'm doing. And we don't feel like we're going 80 miles an hour. But we have gone from 85 down an interstate in Texas to 35 in a short order because we are in charge of ourselves. And then we get there and we react to a very complex situation to where we're moving too fast to process, oh, I remember that sign. that's it's a little orange sign at the bottom. That's only recommended. I can still go whatever I feel comfortable. That falls under endangering folks in their workplace. So did I create any different thoughts? Any other situations you guys want to highlight?
One of the things you guys both brought up were just the accountability aspect of it and some penalties. Kenny and Jim, you both mentioned citations that may happen in a work zone, but I know in my travels, of course, I'm up in Missouri and on I-70 and sometimes on I-35, but over in St. Louis this year and at some other locations too, I've noticed that in the entries and exits of those work zones, they'll have an officer sitting there with his lights on, just sitting there, not pulling anybody over, but they're just sitting there in the event that they need to intervene with somebody who's not adhering to the signs and the laws like you're talking about, Jim. So, they're taking that serious as well because, those guys and gals that are working in that work zone, they've got a job to do. They want to get in there and get it done and get out of there. Their intent's not to hold anybody up, obviously, but we need to protect those folks. So that's something that I saw. And one thing that I wanted to bring up with our drivers out there, which I know you guys, professional truck drivers, you're looking at your routes, where you're going, that kind of stuff. And if you're not familiar, you're probably getting the map out or at least seeing what roads you want to take, that kind of stuff. Well, most states have an interactive map that'll show work zones on it. I know Missouri does, and I didn't do it. I should have done some research before the podcast and I didn't, but I know Missouri's got on their website, you can get in there. It's got an interactive map. It shows you where the work zones are at, how long they're going to be there, what's going on, that kind of stuff. So I would encourage you all to do that when you're doing your trip planning. Just check out where those work zones are at. Just so you're aware of where you're going to be traveling through and what you might encounter, just like you would any other part of your trip as well. But that's this work zone awareness is a big deal, and that's definitely should be part of your trip planning.
Guys, I brings back a lot of memory. I worked a fatality wreck one time as a trooper in Texas in a work zone, and it was where a worker got hit by a vehicle. I was getting information from the foreman, and I'll never forget, big old strong guy, a man's man, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said something that, they get beat over the head so much about OSHA regulations, and this foreman said that hard hat and orange vest didn't do him very much good, did it? And the point he was making, I want y'all to let this sink in, that was PPE, personal protective equipment, required by the federal government for that young man to be wearing in that construction zone. But when he got hit by a 3,500-pound automobile at highway speeds, that PPE was irrelevant. So he was wearing something he was mandated to wear, but it didn't really protect him from the danger that was coming through his workplace there every day. And one other thing that foreman said to me, he said, the work we do is dangerous enough. And then we've got these cars zipping by us. And the point, they were laying asphalt, hot asphalt, and heavy equipment, moving parts, very loud, danger from the heat of the asphalt itself, all kind of conveyor belts and chains, and I mean, just a heavy industrial site. And these men are working in that environment anyway. And then, Mike, like you said, we got cars flying by them, literally inches from them. And the only thing between them and those cars are an orange rubber cone and an orange vest and a hard hat. And it goes back to the point I shared with y'all earlier. There's no out. It's a very unforgiving environment, both for the people driving and for those men and women that are working inside that work zone. And so I want to leave you with this, and I'm done. And Jim, you can close us, and Mike, you can add anything you want to. A lot of our listeners are safety directors at trucking companies, and we are drawing attention with this podcast to the 1 week that is set aside for our nation to observe work zone, or in Texas, we still call them construction zone, but construction zone safety. And so I want to challenge all my brother and sister safety directors that listen to this podcast I want to challenge you to dedicate one of your toolbox talks, one of your safety meetings, one of whenever you get before drivers, and refresh their memory about work zone safety and the dangers for them in and of itself, the hazards for them driving through it, the consequences for them driving irresponsibly through it, and then highlight for them the danger of those men and women that are working in that work zone. And so the safety directors out there, take advantage of this week and use it as the platform for your next safety talk with your drivers.
Thanks for sharing, Kenny. From Kenny, Mike, and I, we'd like to ask you to put down your devices, slow down in work zones, drive safely in and out of those work zones. We'd like to thank our construction work zone workers. Thank you for making our roads safe by making them smooth, for being out there in the rain and the snow and the heat. We appreciate your efforts, because a well-maintained road keeps us safe while we're operating our vehicles. To those drivers that are out there, these are our brothers and our sisters and other human beings that are out there working. We need to care about them as much as we care about arriving on time or ahead of time. And that's a daily thing that we can do, whether we ever know their name, to help them get home safe, back to their family and their kids. So thank you, and we will see you next time.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.